Hey, welcome back to another devlog for my Untitled Cute Space game. I'm Matt Shell, and this is Thousand Ant. And in this video, I'm going to talk about some of how I'm trying to apply the ideas of loops and systems thinking to the design for my game, what those things are, and I'll also walk you through how I'm actually thinking about implementing them and show you some graphs and charts and stuff that I'm building to do that. So let's get started. So first of all, I just want to give you a little intro to some of the kind of high-level concepts, and then I'll jump over to the computer and take you through some of the actual sort of diagrams of what I'm working on. So the idea of systems thinking is a really useful one. This is something that I got from Michael Seller's book, Advanced Game Design. I've been referencing a lot. Check it out. If we think about an example of a system of a designer designing a game, right? We have kind of three nodes in that system. We have the designer, in this case me. We have the game, the Untitled Cute Space game here. And then we have the player, right? And I am making changes to the system of the game. The player is playing the game, and then ideally I'm getting some feedback from the player, right? Going back to the designer, and then I'm making changes, and we're looping through that system, right? So in that case, that's a kind of quite high-level abstract system where we just have those three elements treated as abstractions. In fact, each of those elements is a complex system in and of itself, right? I'm a human being with all that complexity. The player is also a human being. And the game is a system composed of multiple subsystems and its own interacting loops, right? So to kind of apply systems thinking here, we can go down a level of abstraction, kind of go inside the game, and then look at it as a series of interlocking systems. Making changes to those interlocking systems is going to affect the high-level outcome of our designer game player system, right? So we have these kind of nested layers of systems that interact at different levels of abstraction, right? And in a game, we have the same thing. We have the whole game as a system. Inside the game, we might have a crafting system and a combat system, upgrading your abilities system, a talent tree system, right? All of those are going to, in a good design, are going to kind of loop through and interact with one another. Getting better at combat maybe allows you to access more crafting materials, which allows you to upgrade your talent tree, which allows you to get better at combat, and you loop through the system, right? And so for me, being able to have the right balance of those systems, or at least get the ideas of how they're going to interact early on, I'm hoping is going to help avoid some of the biggest icebergs in production of, oh, we built all these separate parts, but none of them really interact with each other. Maybe each of them are kind of like fun mini games by themselves, but there's no systemic dynamism, right? There's no interaction between all these different systems. They're not really driving one another or making interesting loops for the player, right? And I think that my goal at this point in the process is trying to really interrogate the design, trying to make it better. As I mentioned in another video, I reached out to actually Michael Sellers, who wrote the book, to get some coaching from him and to evaluate the design from this perspective, and he's given me some good input. And actually one of the kind of pieces of homework that he basically gave me was to say, I think a good next step would be to go through, diagram the loops and systems in your game and start to think about how they look and how they're interacting and so on. And so that's the process that I've been engaged in. I'll go over to the computer and show those in a moment, but basically getting those diagrams laid out, looking at how each loop by itself interacts, right? Like let's say the mining system or the plant growing system, right? Trying to figure out what is the loop of that? And then is there a point in that loop where we could be taking input from another system, or there could be a link between two systems where now we're creating a more dynamic loop, right? So then I have a chart that shows this kind of spaghetti of all these things trying to connect to each other and interact with each other. This is all work in progress, still relatively early stage, right? But it's definitely helping me to visualize how are these things going to work together? What are they going to do? Also, from a production perspective, which of these are important, what is it that everything runs to, right? So let's move over to the computer and I'll take you through some of the diagrams that I've made so far. Here we are in diagrams.net. This is the kind of mega spaghetti diagram of the whole game as it currently stands. I am going to take you through the sub loops that I have so far, and then we can look at how these all play out. But just to give you an idea of the kind of relationships that we're talking about, we can look at the mine for rocks loop, right? This is its own subsystem here where you're using droids to mine asteroids. Then you can spend mined crafting materials, configure and upgrade droids, which allow you to mine for more rocks, right? So this is a kind of a relatively contained subsystem here, which is represented in this individual diagram by the asteroid mining loop here, where we start by picking mining targets, right? We pick which asteroid we want to mine. The droids fly over, they start mining rocks, they return with the mined ore. We refine those ore items into crafting materials. We craft items and equipment. We equip and upgrade the droids, right? There's a little kind of fitting things into the droids, outfitting system. I mean, this actually could be broken into its own sub loop. That's probably something for me to do. And then, of course, once you've equipped and upgraded, you send them back out to pick mining targets, right? So this is its own kind of self-contained loop, but this, in a kind of perfect systemic design world, would have points where it interacts with other systems. For example, equipping and upgrading droids. The recipes for the droid upgrades, right, are not going to come from inside this system necessarily. They should come from somewhere else, and that's going to cause the player to go out and interact with that other system. So this is what I'm calling VR mystery dungeons. There's going to be an in-game VR headset that the character wears and goes into something that's almost a little bit like the VR missions in the old Metal Gear Solid. They're these little simulations where the player goes in and looks for items. It's a kind of a collecting mini game where you have a limited time to search a procedurally generated dungeon space, find items, get as many as you can before you run out of time and have to come back out, right? So it's almost like a little speed running type thing. And basically, so we start in this kind of inner space, like the Matrix, right? With this white space where you can process the found virtual items. You pick a dungeon type and a seed for the dungeon. I think there might be some interesting stuff to do around dungeon seeds, right? Charge a battery, right? That's going to be, the battery is like your kind of oxygen tank of how long you can stay under, how long you can stay in the dungeon. Explore the dungeon, run around, find virtual collectible items. The battery runs out, right? The battery is running while you're moving in the space. A little bit like Super Hot, right? You run and the battery runs down. And then you go back to the interspace, right? Where you can take those items, put them into like a vending machine to turn them into what I'm currently thinking is recipes and kind of information items. Basically, you're collecting information inside the simulation and you're getting, for example, this could be a place where you get recipes for droid upgrades. So here we mentioned a battery, right? Where you need to charge a battery with energy. You need to basically invest some of an energy resource into this run. That connects to the energy loop here. We start by crafting batteries and solar panels, right? We put the solar panels out to catch sunlight. We put the collected sun energy into batteries. Those batteries could be put into droids. They could be put into the VR mystery dungeon game. Overflow energy is discarded. This is something that I'm figuring out, but basically where you can't just endlessly stockpile energy. There's a baseline cost for your whole base, effectively, your ship, everything that you're running. There will be some energy cost to just having more stuff and a bigger spaceship and more of everything. That's going to be a downward pressure, right? Is that there will be an energy cost just to having all that stuff. And then energy is spent on player selected activities. You know, I've talked about not having money in the game, the collected energy from the solar panels, but basically energy is probably the closest thing that we have to money, but very importantly, it's probably the most fungible currency that we can spend in different systems in the game. But very importantly, you get it for free from the sun. So you spend your energy, go back to crafting batteries and solar panels if you're gonna do that, and then the solar panels catch sunlight. That's the energy loop. The last sub loop that I've graphed so far. Here we have this, I've mentioned the kind of idea of a gift economy. The plant system, planting plants, is gonna be a key point in that gifting economy, sending people gifts of food and fruits and plants, and then they will send you back seeds. Let's say you grow a peach tree in your little hydroponic farm, right? Or maybe not a peach, but maybe some tomatoes or something. You grow some tomatoes, you make some delicious tomato sauce, and then you can, share that tomato sauce with your NPC neighbor. That increases your relationship status with them, and then maybe later on they will decide to send you a recipe for pizza, for example. So we have this gifting and receiving gifts, basically food in this case, and seeds, or maybe there's another plant-based, you could send somebody flowers or something, and then you pick seeds to plant. You prepare a planter, which you would have to craft a planter using like asteroid materials, right? Like a metal bucket, for example. Plant those seeds. You water and care for the plants. Initially, you're gonna have to do it manually. Later, there can be some automation layer, a little bit like in Stardew Valley, right? Where you can get sprinklers later. You harvest the plants, fruits, and seeds, cook, craft, or process the outputs. And then we continue the loop, right? That you could give a gift, maybe receive some seeds, plant the seeds, and continue. There's going to be a in-game, basically in-game Instagram. This feels a little crazy. This is maybe out of scope, so I'm figuring it out. But actually, when we look at the larger systems graph, we can see that I think I maybe need it. And so the NPC, right, the kind of villager equivalent, right, your neighbors, which you interact with primarily on social media, in-game social media, maybe react, and then depending on, let's say you shared a photo of your tomato sauce or your pizza that you made, they might be like, oh, I'll send you some basil seeds because I know that you're making pizza and you might want some basil seeds. You pick a recipe for a piece of clothing or furniture to craft, right? I think this is gonna function as a resource sink, a way to destroy resources out of the game and keep the economy from breaking. You say, okay, I wanna make a shirt, gather the required resources, you put them in a 3D printer, which is going to print them, which takes time, right? There's this whole theme of waiting, which hopefully is going to be fun. I don't know, people don't really like waiting, right? But I want the game to still progress on a real-time time scale like Animal Crossing, right? So you start something, and so that when you come back tomorrow or the next day, it's done, right? Which I think I like as an idea. You start printing, time passes, and then the object is complete. You can equip or place the item. You could wear the item of clothing, or you could place the piece of furniture or decoration in the house. You can take and share photos of the result, right? If you made a chair or you made a shirt, you can take a photo of it, post it on the in-game social media, and then the loop continues. This whole thing is honestly probably it's going to be a ton of work to make it. It's complicated. This is probably where the scope blows, and this might be one of the things where it's like this has to be in version 2, or maybe not in the kind of first minimal version of the game. So we'll see, right? But so now we go all the way back to this mega thing. But if we look at, mine for rocks, spend crafted materials, the crafted materials could be used to build planters and growing equipment, which feeds into the plant growing loop, right? Which feeds into the cooking loop. There's a system, a kind of a Sims-like system of the player being bored or happy or kind of disengage a mood loop, which is going to affect other systems. Again, I don't know if I'm going to implement that. And actually what this kind of sees is that basically looks like an endpoint in a lot of ways, that, growing plants, decorating clothing, and cooking all goes into the loop, but this doesn't go out anywhere, right? Which actually makes me look at the graph and think, maybe I can cut it, right? Maybe that's not a key system yet, or it needs to be more connected to be useful. The decorating, clothing, creative loop goes into giving gifts. It takes input from the solar energy collection loop. NPCs giving you a recipe for a shirt and then you crafting the shirt and giving it to them as a gift or posting a picture feeds into the NPC community loop, right? This looks more integrated. NPCs give seeds, which go into the plant growing loop, right? The input for that, we have sunlight. NPCs could give you seeds for dungeons or tips about dungeons, which I think is going to be, it's an interesting thing with procedural generation. You could just have a seed value. And the NPC could say, hey, use this seed value and you can go here, or give you almost like dungeon, mystery dungeon biomes. And then you get basically recipes out of there, which you can use to create art and entertainment. This is a whole other system that's not graphed yet in a loop, but basically where you can like make entertainments, which feeds into the droid happiness loop. The droids want things like comic books and music to listen to while they're doing their asteroid mining. Otherwise they get bored and grouchy. So this is a variant on this happiness boredom loop, right? For the player, I don't know if it's necessary for the player, but it's definitely necessary for the droids, right? So the droids will drop in mining efficiency if they are not getting their art and entertainment, which connects to Mystery Dungeon. So this is all like linked up pretty nicely. One of the things actually that Mike Sellers recommended was the idea that maybe the droids give recipes when they're happy, which could feed back into either decorating or configure an upgrade, right? I think there's something interesting there that some recipes, not just coming from the NPCs or the Mystery Dungeon, recipes could come from the droids themselves. And then that feeds back in, or they could even give you recipes for the art and entertainment, right? And then of course, if the droids are happy, they're gonna mine more effectively and so on, right? So making this graph kind of shows us things like that this might be an orphaned system, that this isn't connecting back into anything right now, and maybe it's not needed. Whereas like some of these other things, like this feels like pretty juicy to me, right? There's a couple of things they're connecting and interacting through this like recipes and happiness and entertainment stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that is probably worthwhile, right? Like this whole part of the graph I feel pretty good about. The mining and the entertainment and the Mystery Dungeon and all that stuff, that feels pretty good. This part I'm a little worried about because of the scope. And this might be orphaned or not needed, or like plant growing, maybe it gets very simple. Maybe we get rid of cooking, for example. And that's kind of what having this graph is allowing me to think about. Are these things connected enough? Are they so connected that it's good and needed to have it and do it? And we can make decisions about what needs to be in or not be in the minimum viable product. So hopefully that was interesting. Let me know in the comments down below. Have you wrestled with any of these questions, or have you come up with great, elegant solutions for any of these problems? That's probably what I'm more interested in, right? Give me some ideas if you've got anything to share. And of course, if you're enjoying the videos, please do consider dropping a like on the video. Consider subscribing if you're not already. We really appreciate that. As always, I just really appreciate your spending a little bit of time with me. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.